And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Sunday morning's flying weather graphic. Not too bad here in the interior. A lot of VFR. Marginal VFR, Western Alaska Range, North Gulf Coast here. And the North Slope and Arctic Coast, a lot of IFR up that way. Otherwise, marginal VFR, Bering Sea and Seward Peninsula here. Yukon Delta on down toward Togiak Bay. And for the Alaska Peninsula, and then Adak right on the edge of the marginal VFR, and mostly VFR for the southeast coast, and some IFR here east side of Kodiak Island on up in toward, the Barrens there, but just south of Cook Inlet. And for the afternoon, that area shifts off to the northeast here, and we've got IFR along the North Gulf Coast into Yakutat, IFR for the southeast coast, and good VFR here in the interior with IFR, again, North Slope to the Arctic coast. And still not too bad out over the Bering Sea, just some marginal VFR from the Chukchi Sea through the Strait, St. Lawrence Island, Pribilofs, Nunivak Island, and down toward Atka into the Fox Islands here, and of course the Alaska Peninsula. And for the morning hours, Monday, marginal VFR, Adak, westward to the Komodorskis, and Central Bering Sea, St. Lawrence Island to the Pribilofs to eastern Aleutians, Unalaska, Nikolsky, Atka looking pretty good. VFR in the forecast for those locations. And here just a little farther to the east over the western part of the state, we've got marginal VFR right on up over the North Slope and much of the Brooks Range here. IFR now retreated back to the central and east central Arctic coast with VFR now all the way down into Cook Inlet, and IFR up along the North Gulf Coast there, but just south of Prince William Sound, marginal VFR for the southeast coast. And for the afternoon Monday, IFR disappears here, leaving marginal VFR behind. So improving here for the southern Kenai Peninsula, marginal VFR Yakutat down toward Dixon Entrance, so including all of the panhandles you can see, and some marginal VFR on the east side of Kodiak Island, VFR holding in the interior down to the Copper River Basin, and then marginal VFR for the North Slope and much of the Arctic coast. Central Arctic coast, they're still seeing some IFR. Eastern Bering Sea, open VFR from St. Lawrence Island down to the eastern Aleutians. Then from about Atka Island westward, marginal VFR. And for the passes, Anatuvik and Adigan both look marginal tomorrow with lower IFR out the northern entrance for both passes. Lake Clark and Merrill optimistically going VFR and for the forecast for those two passes. Rainy VFR as well. Windy looking good. Should be open. VFR flying also for Isabel and Mentasta. And now for Tanita, marginal VFR. And Portage, IFR, especially on the eastern entrance. And Chilkoot and White, marginal VFR becoming IFR. And for the freezing levels here, looking at about 4,000 to 6,000 feet here over the southern panhandle. Otherwise, around 2,000 feet from the Gulf of Alaska all the way up to the Arctic coast and out into the Bering Sea. Not much gradient out here at all, and thermal gradient, that is, and then maybe 4,000 feet just south of the western Aleutians. And from there, taking a look at icing, we've got a pretty good chance, or the greatest chance of some considerable moderate icing will be here across all of the southeast coast. And then from there, going on to the jet stream. Trough of low pressure here from the interior down there, Kodiak Island, shifting sort of eastward there. And so we've got southwest winds at 33,000 feet, 95 to 100 knots or so over the central and southern southeast coast. 70 knot southerlies there over toward the eastern border. And then back to the west of the trough here, of course, the northerly winds across all of the Bering Sea, strongest about 65 knots or so there just off the Yukon Delta coast, but even stronger northerlies, 65 to 90 knots coming down across the central Aleutians. 3,000 feet, same pattern, northerly winds out here over the Bering Sea coming out of the Russian Far East, 40 to 45 knots. Light winds over the interior with several lows here, especially over the west coast areas. And then southwest winds pretty strong, up to 55 knots there for the northern panhandle area. And at 3,000 feet, we've got 45 knot winds coming into the central coast of the southeast coast. East-southeast 40 knots across the northern Gulf of Alaska up toward Prince William Sound, and some stronger winds here in Cook Inlet as well, with north winds out over the Bering Sea, running about 35 to 40 knots through the Bering Strait, and then mostly 40 knots here on down across the Pribilofs into the Atka area over toward the eastern Aleutians. And from there, moving on to turbulence, could be some considerable moderate turbulence, especially for small aircraft here along the Yukon Delta coast, Nunivak Island area, but the greatest threat will be here over the eastern Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula, on up toward Kodiak Island, North Gulf Coast into Prince William Sound, and back down across the southeast coast.